Hi, I'm Ali Patterson. On this episode of Future Banking, as a part of a special upcoming episode around women in banking, finance and equality, we speak with the headliner of that episode, Cheryl Newton. I speak with Pitney Bowes about customer centricity and the age of the customer. I also speak with Anne Boden about some of the challenges that banks face.
And with Karen Walker, Head of Customer Services at First Direct.
So I've come to speak with Cheryl Newton,
Group Operations CIO, Group IT at Lloyds Banking Group.
Let's talk about the Women's Agenda. Last year you won the Women in Banking and Finance Award for Achievement. What do you think the biggest issue is for women in the workplace?
I am the Group IT Board Director sponsoring the Women's Agenda. It's good to see Antonio launching the Helping Britain Prosper plan. And I'm pleased to note that we've publicly declared that 40% of senior roles will be held by women by 2020.
It makes me very proud to be part of the first FTSE 100 organisation to make such a commitment.
As a large technology organisation, being able to attract, fully utilise, develop and retain female talent is incredibly important to us. We know that some of our very talented colleagues fail to progress at a certain point in their career, and we continue to work really hard to remove the barriers to that progression. Within IT, which has historically been a male-dominated environment, we also know that it will take time and more time to address the gender balance at the top of the organisation. Whilst not peculiar to women, we have identified a number of key obstacles to progression. Some are around women having really good support from their line management, but they don't have generally a sponsorship or advocacy more widely across the organisation. At Lloyds Banking Group, we offer mentoring and take it very seriously. Some women don't take the time to consider their own careers. They're juggling personal commitments, families, work commitments, and they don't take the opportunity to think about what stretching roles might exist and potentially moving outside of their current environment. We would like women to have more courage to pursue roles that offer more stretch and more development. We'd also like them to take a more leader-like rather than manager-like approach and have a more strategic view at more senior levels. We are adapting a more creative mindset to flexible working, but for everybody, not just those returning from maternity leave.
I've come to speak with Pitney Bowes about customer centricity and document management within financial services.
You need to try and empower your employees. And the way to do that is by building it from a bottom up. So it's not something you can dictate saying, here we've got a new system, new technology, top down, it's not going to work. What you need is, you need empowered employees, you need to bring them along, you need to provide training, you need to provide a system of rewards. That can be supported by the software. Software is maybe a key enabler, but it's not enough on its own. It needs to be supported by culture. For example, Nationwide Building Society. They have had a program called Pride in Nationwide, Pride in what we do, for quite some time. And it has a lot of different facets to it. But it also, one of the aspects it has is enables people who are doing customer service, customer-facing areas, to do a lot more than you would normally expect from that job function. But enabling to help customers in lots of different ways, to have the information available through the software about the customers which they need for that, but also maybe then to do more, depending on what the customer needs, maybe identify sales opportunities. As a result of that, they get better interactions with customers. Customers feel they don't need to call again, or they get everything dealt with immediately. They get a much more personalized service. They have higher satisfaction rates. As a result of that, employee communications or employee satisfaction rates also increase, because if a customer has a better communication, the employee has a better communication. For example, in call centers, we see that this affects turnover, because it's a high-pressure environment, and if the communications on average are better, people tend to stick around longer. It's almost a spiral of success. Yeah. But the key thing to bear in mind, software is important, but it's the culture. You need a program of empowerment. And there's a kind of a rule of thumb where you should spend at least as much, or maybe even up to twice as much, on empowerment than you do on the technology and the software.
I went to speak with Anne Boden more about people empowerment, but also about potential distribution within the financial service industry.
I think there's a certain amount of complacency that the existing model will stay as it is forever. Looking back over my career, and it's been over 30 years now, nothing much has changed. There's more that's been, well, exactly the same than has really, really disrupted the industry. I think we're now in a situation with, post-2008 crisis, more regulation, consumers really wanting to see something very, very different and demanding better service. Something has to change. There will be disruption. The question is, what is that going to be?
We went out to speak with members of the public about how they feel about the customer experience they receive from their bank.
My bank's customer service is absolutely great. The bank itself is not doing so great at the moment. It's the co-op.
Okay, next question then.
They seem friendly when I walk in.
Yeah, I feel the bank's pretty good, yes. Yeah, we're with Lloyds, so it's pretty good. So, yeah.
I feel that most of the time that my bank does want to listen to me. Occasionally I feel that they make things overcomplicated and that makes life difficult. So it's quite frustrating if you need to get hold of money in a hurry and actually you have to go through elaborate processes and procedures.
It's quite good. I'm with First Direct, and when you call them up, someone answers the phone.
So I've come to speak with Karen Walker from First Direct about the customer experience.
Everything we do is about our customers, and actually that's how First Direct started. So we started when we were thinking about setting up First Direct by putting the word customer at the centre of a piece of paper, and everything we did evolved around that word and certainly around our customers. So just from the lengths that our people will go to for customers, so if it's really busy they'll go to every degree that they can to make sure that that customer gets serviced properly in a timely manner and that the experience is a great one. If customers are in trouble, we'll go all out to help them. And actually it's part of our culture, it's inherent within the business that we will service our customers. And I think what First Direct does really, really well is any other metric isn't something that we worry about unless service is where it needs to be. So service always will come first, and obviously by that meaning customers come first. I think some organisations focus a lot on the numbers. The only number that we're concerned with is the amount of time it takes for us to get to a customer. So how long it takes us to pick the phone up. And then how long it takes us to give them what they need. And obviously some queries are more complex and it takes us longer to deal with those. But actually our whole aim is to make sure that the customer experience is a fantastic one and we do what the customer asks us to do in as quick as time as we possibly can.
Customers expect to communicate with you as an organisation how and when they choose. They expect to have a personalised and great experience, and they need to trust you as an organisation. So we're drilling down a little deeper into those. We have the customer today is embedded in a social network often. There's much more sharing between people. People see their peers often as experts. So if they have an experience, a good or a bad experience, more often a bad one, that gets shared in a social group. The customer expects to communicate with you as a bank when they want to, on a channel of their choosing. They also expect to get a personalised service. So they want the bank to know, without having to explain very much, whatever the customer knows about themselves and their dealings with it. So say, I call you up today and I'm going on a website tomorrow and I'm going into the branch the day after that. I don't want to have to repeat myself again and again and again. I want the bank to be aware of what I have done and also what I need. Relates to this issue of getting a good experience, because when we speak to a customer and the customer gets a bad experience, as I said, that gets shared within a peer group. So while as a bank I need to provide an individualized service, I also need to be aware that there might be a wider audience listening into that, especially if I mess it up. And if I mess it up, what often happens is the trust of a customer into me as an organization gets affected. And there's a lot of research out there which says that trust is one of the main factors behind customer loyalty. And customer loyalty and customer engagement is one of the key reasons, essentially, for driving revenue. Forrester, the Market Research Institute, calls this the age of a customer.
Yes.
And what that means, essentially, or one of the terms we're using as well, is we're saying it's not enough to be customer focused. You have to be customer obsessed.
What are your views on, and there's a lot of organisations out there that have got trust, that are very good at data, that have the capital,
that have recently started moving into financial services. I'm talking your Tesco Bank, your Sainsbury's, your John Lewis. Where do you think these arguably challenger banks are going to be positioned in the next 5 years?
If you look at challenger banks, the retailers, the Sainsbury's, the Tesco's, announcing they're going to launch current accounts, I think there's a question of whether their brand can extend that far. And there's also a question of trusting your data with somebody. I think banking is far more than just, well, doing lots and lots of analytics on your bank account and figuring out what you have to sell you next. I think big data and using that data to sell more, very much the retailer's model, could be very, very dangerous in the banking world. We have to take this balance very, very seriously. We need to use the client data for the benefit of the clients and not to take every opportunity to sell something off that data. That could be the very next best mis-selling scandal.
I think sometimes you're looking for, you know, something you can be confident with. You might be more confident to put your money with a bank rather than a supermarket. Just because supermarket sells food, whereas banks do money. So
I don't think I'd really consider banking with Tesco's or Sainsbury's, or I'd go for a retail bank, I guess.
I've got bits of money all over the place. I've got some in Barclays as well. So I probably just haven't found the right bank that suits my beliefs, my values. There you go.
Well, thank you very
I would consider banking with a retailer. I think it's probably going to be about kind of access, ease, accessibility. I'm probably not going to be as bothered about the brand or what it is they do.
I guess I want a bank to be a bank. I don't really see that. Yeah, no, I want a bank to be a bank.
Fantastic rates or anything like that, you would.
If I had fantastic rates, I mean, I'd think about it. I mean, I've banked with Sainsbury's in the past. I think they used to have a fantastic savings rate, so I did bank with Sainsbury's for a little bit on their savings account. So yeah, if I've got a great rate, then yeah, I'll be tempted by anything. I'm pretty keen on value for money, so.
With such a mixed reaction from the general public, it's important to look at how you communicate with your customers.
A lot of electronic messages get ignored. There is a bit of a backlash in some areas, going back to printed. And the key point to remember is that it's using the right message for the right person. So there are customers for whom electronic messages are absolutely the way to go. That is what we want, that is what we look at. There is an issue maybe that it's too much of it. People have a preference and they may be more accustomed or familiar with a certain type of communication, and in many cases that can be electronic. But there are also segments of customers where this is not the case. And often there's a strong drive or there used to be a strong drive to a self-serve channel or electronic communications, and certain customer groups were almost a bit left out of that. Maybe people who are not so tech savvy, or who are kind of prefer the printed document in many ways. So what companies or banks can do now is segment their customer base much more carefully to take into account, first of all, what's the customer preference, but also what might be the best way of communicating with this customer. Banks can see what's the effectiveness of a certain type of communications, be it printed, be it electronic, be it maybe a call in a branch, and then taking that into account when communicating with a customer and choosing the right way, and maybe not always the same way of communicating with a customer, to enhance the customer experience.
With all this fantastic technology to enhance the customer experience, what is actually holding banks back?
Only a couple of weeks ago, one of the CEOs of the big banks in the UK stood up at his results day and described the environment that these big banks live in. I think it's something like 500 projects. They need to cut down to 100, 80 payment systems down to 10. And there was a whole couple of slides about how complex their world was and how their number one priority was to cut down on those number of systems. And setting aside all your old infrastructure and putting in new is very difficult. I think there's a well-known building society in the UK and a well-known Australian bank that have actually put in a new banking system. And that cost a couple of billion and took 5, 6, 7 years. Doing this renewal of systems is high risk and very expensive. So what will you do? Do you want to stop everything for 5, 6 years until you've replaced everything? You probably can't afford to do that. It's a very, very difficult problem. the big banks have to learn to work across the organisations together on a project to get things done. Because it's more a question of really addressing the problem rather than thinking of it as a big, big project. So I think you have small groups of people working across the organisation, you can get things live far quicker than if you do it the traditional way. I'm a big advocate of minimal viable products and agile technologies.
This approach seems a very sensible way to implement new technology, which of course has an effect on your revenue.
This is the age of the customer, as Forrester says, and you have to be customer obsessed. And we see a lot of examples of that, especially in retail banks. So for example, Scandia Bank, the largest customer-owned bank in the Nordics, Nationwide Building Society, US Bank, and loads of others are having very big programs around creating meaningful content, integrating lots of different communications, making sure that you can communicate with the customer as and how and when the customer chooses, but also how the customer prefers, and providing personalized content which is relevant for the customer as and when what events are happening in the customer's life. So for example, if you get married, then you might get some communication saying, are you interested in loans around paying for your wedding? So for example, you might talk about it to your friends, you might post it on your social media sites, you might communicate in other ways, but the key thing is it gets picked up, it gets analyzed, it gets integrated with other communications, and your bank is much more able to provide a good service. And while in many organizations there is still an ambition, and we're not there, but there are other organizations, like some of the ones I mentioned, where a lot of that we can see happening. And the customer is being put at the forefront of every interaction.
On the next Future Banking, we head to Copenhagen to speak with NETS about future payment systems. We also head to Paris to look at Glory Global Solutions' new showcase exhibit.